Okay, so now you understand that you're going to be doing interviews. You're trying to get people to help you. You are going to have an engaging manner on your interview. You're not going to be, a bully or anything like that. And ultimately, you're trying to find out who did the fraud and get that person to also confess in an interview. So you're going to plan your interview, assuming you've figured out who's in which stage of the crisis, and hopefully they're in acceptance when you're talking to them. They may not always be, but try for that. So now you're going to plan. So, right, you want to go in there and figure out in advance as many facts as you can, right? So you've done your research, you've gone through the accounting and financial information, you've gone to the county and gotten information from the deed records, whatever. You've rounded up all the information you can round up without talking to people, right? So that's kind of your first step. We've talked about that. So you're rounding stuff up, you're figuring things out, who should know what, right? So you've gathered all that, and start figuring out a time and location that's going to be effective. And remember, it's about keeping the person you're interviewing feeling like they want to talk to you. So having them come down to some strange place might or might not be a good idea, but just interrupting them at work might not be a good idea either. So a place where people are going to feel fairly comfortable most of the time. If you're dealing with somebody hostile who's maybe in the anger stage of a crisis, maybe you need to go talk to them at their home, knock on their door, and just kind of surprise them. But mostly, you're going to make appointments, you're going to arrange to see people at the place where they work. All right, so make sure you're being professional, polite, careful, right? You're the one who's supposed to be leading this interview, right? So you're taking the lead in being professional, polite, and people will follow your lead. It's typically not a good idea to sit at a desk with people between you. I mean, with your desk between you, you want to be like kind of maybe sitting at a table with them next to you. You're beside each other, something like that. But again, still sensitive to where people want to be comfortable with their personal space, right? Of course, nowadays, right, you can't sit right next to somebody. So be sensitive about their personal concern, be businesslike, but don't be like you're telling them what to, you better do this, you better do that, don't be authoritarian. You're trying to get them to help you, right? And you're trying to get them to think you understand them and where they're coming from, because if a person is rationalizing why they did a fraud, you want to be like, I totally understand that, when your son got in trouble, you needed to hire a lawyer. Of course, that anybody would do that, right? You're sympathizing with them, So have a pleasant demeanor, a professional demeanor. Be grateful to them. Thank you for coming to see me today. Thank you for letting me have some of your time. Makes people feel like they're helping you. Thank you for helping me, right? Figure this out. This money's gone missing. Thank you for helping me figure this out. On the note-taking thing, if you can, if you're good at remembering things, you're good at remembering things, take your notes at the end, jot things down after they leave the room, right? That's a well-known technique that as soon as they leave, you write things down. If you can record things, great, do that. That's a good idea. And when they've been cooperative and been helpful, be thankful. Say, thank you very much. Is it all right if I contact you if I have some follow-up questions, things like that? Make sure you can get back in touch with them. It's an upbeat. You've been really helpful. That's a good one. It's been so helpful, right? So, and it is helpful, right? So we've talked about being careful with the language you use. You don't want to get into these long drawn out, here's a scenario, here's a question, just fairly short questions. And I want to remind you that as we start going, we're going to start talking about introductory questions, informative questions, assessment questions, all these different kinds of questions. And in your book, there's a lot of good examples. So take the time to look at that book while we're talking about these different kinds of questions and the language we're using, because your book does have some very good examples in Chapter 10. So you're trying to get them to talk to you, so you don't want to suggest the answer. Like, were you in the warehouse about 4 p.m. when the stuff was stolen? You just want to say, tell me about what happened that day in the warehouse or something like that. You don't want them to just talk about anything, try to keep them focused, but you do want to let them have their say, not interrupt them. Make sure you understand what they've said before you go on to any more questions. Maybe repeat something back in different words, because you want to make sure you get... Sometimes people use words that mean different things than what you're used to, especially us in accounting, right? All these accounting words mean one thing to us and something else to another person. All right? So don't let them, especially if you think somebody's the actual suspect, you think they're the ones who did the crime, don't let them draw you off topic, right? You can point out some evidence and ask them about it. Don't point out everything until you're certain you have the suspect and you're pointing out to them evidence. What about this? What about that? How do you explain this, right? So evidence is useful to get people to explain to you what's going on. I found this invoice that's a photocopy and not the original. How can you explain that? And ask them about that and just see what they say. So talk about some of the evidence you found. It's a good way to get some answers. Now, we're going to get into talking about some different types of questions. All right, so here they are. We're going to talk specifics about them, but this is their categories. There's introductory questions, informational questions, assessment questions, closing questions, and admission-seeking questions. So we'll talk about these all in more detail in a minute, but just understand different times of the interview, you're going to ask different kinds of questions, and these are the kind of general kinds of questions. If it's a general interview, it's not with the suspect, you're just trying to find some information, you'll go with some introductory stuff, you'll go to informational, and you'll go to closing. All right? And finally, if you're interviewing the actual suspect, you can then, and you're pretty sure, then you'll go to admission-seeking type questions. All right, so before we talk about our actual words we're going to use and then getting into specific types of questions, I want to talk about when you're having a conversation with the person, which is what an interview is. It's a conversation. There are different reasons for having a conversation, right? Exchanging a conversation with a person, right? It could be to express yourself. You're trying to tell how you feel, right? It could be to persuade, right? A suspect may be trying to persuade you they didn't do it. You may be trying to persuade the suspect to admit guilt. Therapy. Some people just want to get their feelings out there and feel better. That's one reason people have exchanges, and an interview is a kind of an exchange. Ritual is just the formulaic type conversations we have. Good morning. Good morning. How are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? Right? Ritual. Information exchange. So that's a big part of obviously what we're doing on a fraud examination interview, is we're trying to exchange interview, but more us getting it from them than giving it back, right? But sometimes it helps to give some information in order to get it back, right? Even the suspect is trying to find out what you know, right? So suspects will come to interviews. Sometimes they have to. They're an employee. You have to go talk to this person, and they'll show up. But a lot of times they want to find out if you know that they did it or not. And so they're trying to get... So sometimes you give them a little information, and even some information that makes them think, oh, maybe they don't know, and then they'll start talking, things like that. So it's an exchange of information. So that's basically what an interview is about. there are a few things that inhibit this communication. So if a person is, if you're trying to get this person's help through an interview, right, you're going to be asking them questions, exchanging information for the most part. Some things inhibit, impede, make communication difficult, right? It's going to make the flow difficult. It's going to make that person you're talking to not want to tell you what you need to know from them. So we want to talk a little bit about the kinds of inhibitors to a communication. Two categories: they're unwilling to tell you and they're unable to tell you, right? So if they're unwilling to tell you, then that's you as the fraud examiner to get them willing. And if they're unable, that's for you to either help them become able or find somebody who is able, and maybe they know who that is, right? So these inhibitors to communication are going to come up. They are unwilling means I don't have time. So competing demands for time. So especially, you come up with this even as just an auditor, and there's no fraud going on, but just like people have their jobs too, and I don't have time to talk to you about this aspect of my job because I'm having to do my job. So they've got this competing demands for time, threatened egos. So people are scared. Oh, you're the fraud examiner. You're going to harm me in some way, right? Etiquette. Believe it or not, this is a big one, and different fraud examiners have to handle this differently depending on who you are. So me, as a 60-year-old lady, and you, as maybe a 20-year-old dude, there's some stuff we aren't going to talk about ever. Okay? That's not going to come up because it's not appropriate for us to talk about. Now, so if there is some element of a fraud that a 20-year-old dude might tell another 20-year-old dude, that's where the etiquette comes into play, right? So you have to be careful because there can be some things that are personal and make people feel nervous. In polite society, we don't talk about that. So you have to overcome that sometimes. And of course, trauma. Remember, this fraud is a crime. Some people are personally hurt. Some people feel betrayed. And that is an emotional trauma, and it makes it hard to talk about. They get upset. They can't talk about it. Now, sometimes people are just unable to help you, right? They're like, I would like to help you. Yes, I'm the controller at this company, and I understand a fraud has happened, but I just don't remember that transaction, right? Forgetting. They're confused about the day. Well, I was in the warehouse, but I didn't see anything. Was that a Friday? When was that, right? They don't know. And their inferential confusion means, well, I saw him taking that from the warehouse, but I thought he had permission from the manager, so I just let him go. They just inferred something, so they didn't take notice of it. And just unconscious behavior. We all have our little things that make us shut down, something that reminds us of something else, and we just can't talk about that or can't talk about topics in that area, stuff like that. So that can be happening to in an interview you're in. Remember, you're interviewing humans, not machines. But there are some things that help us overcome and do better, and these are facilitators. So it requires that you understand people a little bit, right? So people are motivated to communicate based on certain things they're trying to get out of the communication, right? So you as the fraud examiner, you're trying to get who did it and get a confession, right? But the people who are talking to you, right, they're kind of thinking, well, what's in this for me? Even if it's subconsciously, right? They may not be, my boss told me to come talk to you. They're not thinking in their head these things. But people are trying to get certain needs filled, right? So maybe they're talking to you because they're fulfilling some expectations. My boss expects me to come here. I'm fine with that. What can I do to help you? Some people want recognition. Yes, I want to help solve that crime. I want to be known as the person who helped. They're altruistic. Altruistic means they're just kind of naturally want to help you. They're that kind of person who just helps all the time. Sometimes they want some sympathy, right? So when you're interviewing a person, sometimes they want some sympathy from you. So you may be fulfilling their expectations, you may be giving them recognition, you may be letting them be altruistic, you may be a sympathetic ear. It's, and you're telling them it's horrible somebody betrayed you and committed this fraud. It makes the whole company look bad, and you're one of the employees at the company. I feel really bad for you, right? Sympathy. A new experience. Believe it or not everybody likes new experiences, but if you work in the warehouse at a place and some stuff went missing from the warehouse and they're trying to catch a person who did it and there's a fraud examiner here or something, that might be interesting. Might be worth checking out. Hey, yeah, sir, that breaks up my day. I'll go talk to that fraud examiner. Sounds kind of interesting. Wonder what they'll ask me. There's people like that. Catharsis. So some people, especially the perpetrator, they feel guilty about what they did. They want to get it out there. Oh, I saw him leave with that stuff. I thought he had permission. He did not. I didn't realize it at the time, but now I feel real bad. My boss is out all that money. They want to get stuff out. Some people need to have meaning. In other words, I'm not just a person who's here fulfilling orders. I'm a person who's contributing to the good of the company. And of course, extrinsic rewards, extrinsic meaning external, outside. So instead of these rewards, in other words, the person who you're interviewing, you're giving them a way to be altruistic, you're giving them a sympathetic ear, you're giving them a catharsis. What you're giving them is like maybe money. Maybe there's a reward for catching the person, right? That's an extrinsic appeal. Or maybe if they help the boss find who did it, they'll look good in the boss's eye, right? So that's an extrinsic reward. All right. So at this point, we're going to quit this video. And the next set, we'll start talking about specific kinds of questions.